So then you say, what's in the center? This ninth consciousness is the openness. So just like the four elements outwardly arise in space, which is openness, there are four types of experience of self within that arise. Recollection, anticipation, grasping and interpretation. These four experiences that arise inwardly are reflections of the outer elements. So there's elements that arise in openness, and there's experiences of self that arise in the mind. So this ninth consciousness is free of duality. It's free of all of these eight consciousnesses because it's the openness in which they arise. It's outwardly called space, it's inwardly called mind. But it's one openness because space is open, open in the way that there's no block, there's no thing that obscures space, there's no object that you can point to and say this is the left side of space and this is the right side of space. There's nothing in space that you can describe. There's nothing in space that you can point to. Space is just openness. And likewise, the mind is openness. We just have two different names for it because we're stuck in a dualistic perspective. So outwardly we call openness space, and inwardly we call openness mind. Outwardly the four elements arise in space and appear to be solid, but really they're ever-changing and impermanent. They don't last. They come together, they fall apart. Inwardly, the four experiences of self come together and fall apart. They arise, they abide, they dissolve, because they're impermanent. But they arise, abide, and dissolve in the openness that we call mind, which is changeless. There's no thing in mind that you can point to. In the nature of mind, there's no thing that you can point to and say, this is the good part of mind, this is the bad part of mind, because it's just openness. So outwardly we call openness space, inwardly we call openness mind, but the secret is that there's just one openness. We've given it two names, but there's just openness. You can't even say there's one openness, because that implies that there's maybe two of something else or three of something. There's not even just one openness, there's just openness. Period. There's openness. Outwardly things arise, abide, and dissolve. They're impermanent because they're compounded. Inwardly things arise, abide, and dissolve. They're impermanent because they're compounded. Openness doesn't arise. Openness doesn't abide, and openness doesn't dissolve. Openness is changeless because there are no parts to it. So openness is this ninth consciousness. This ninth consciousness that is the place in which all of the other eight consciousnesses arise. So in the symbol of the petals in the heart, we say that this ninth consciousness is in the center. But when we're picturing a mandala, you know, there are 8 deities in the mandala of the heart, and then there's the central deity. That central deity is a symbol of the openness. So all of the 8 consciousnesses that are the 8 kind of retinue deities around the central deity, the reason they're the retinue of the central deity is because all of these parts, outward elements and inward experiences, can't exist without the openness. Because that's how they arise, is in the openness. So all of the attendants in the retinue, the 8 deities or the 8 forms of deity around the central deity, can't exist without the central deity. Without the central deity, there's no emanations. So it's the same concept. Central deity in a mandala is the key, the source of all the other deities. Openness is the source of everything that arises, abides, and dissolves. Openness, which is changeless, is where everything happens that's ever-changing and impermanent. So that's the way the consciousnesses work. Through practice, what we do is we stay in the moment. You know, first with shamatha and vipassana, we stay in the moment and we observe the moment. Our eyes focused on openness outwardly and also looking inwardly at the mind. We stay in the moment and we avoid labeling and interpreting. We avoid clinging, we avoid rejection, we avoid acceptance, we avoid all attraction and aversion. We just stay in the moment and perceive. So what we're trying to do is get past the polluted part of the sixth consciousness and get to the heart of the delusion and let go of this belief in a separate self. Let go of this belief which causes us to divide experience into self and other. This belief which distorts our experience by making us believe in a separate self. Just like we might have mistakenly believed that the rope was a snake, we mistakenly believe the arising experiences of elements and self to be a separate self, when really the elements are us, the experiences of self are us, we are arising, abiding, and dissolving in the openness which is us. And there's no division. There's no division between inner and outer. There's no division between mind and space. There's no division between experiences of self and the elements. The experiences of the self and the elements arise in dependence upon each other. No self, no elements. No elements, no self. They both arise in dependence upon each other in this openness which is non-dual.